Well, photography was more of a happenstance. I'm fond to say that I didn't choose photography, but photography chose me. When I was 11, I went to South Africa, where my grandfather and grandmother lived, and went on safaris there from that time on. And I was handed a plastic camera, which became a bit of an appendage and a companion and a translator in many ways. And it was, upon that experience that I continued. My mother had an Olympus OM2, which this is in the 70s. It was a very cool camera at the time. And coming back from these safaris, I proceeded to hijack her camera. And a couple of years later, she upgraded to a Nikon F3. And then I quickly proceeded to take that one away from her. And I guess the jig was up. So I went to college and studied a variety of things. Astronomy was my first passion, but the math got too complicated after a few classes. So I went into natural sciences and into geology and then glaciology. And because of my skills that I had developed as a teenager with a camera, I went to college in California, and there's no shortage of people who want their photos taken. And even in college, I started to get a reputation to take nice photos of people. And from people, I did concerts. And from concerts, I did fashion-ish, I was 21, 22. And I started to get noticed by local businesses and started to shoot product in order to take an offer to shoot commercially that was quite lucrative. And I pursued that for about 12 years at a fairly high level, shooting for, high products. If I can be completely honest, as much as I really loved the experience, and it taught me so much about my craft and me in particular, allowed me to open up and work with crews and things of that nature. In the end, it really wasn't my tribe. I was always more of an athlete and very geeky when it came to science. And so I was handed an opportunity to join a research icebreaker in Antarctica. And I jumped on that opportunity, and that was essentially a game changer. The first thing I would say is that if there's a strong why, you'll find the how. And the strong why for me was climate change. I was privy to transformation happening there from some of my mentors, the studies that I had done, and the fact that in the mid '90s, I would say that this was not the kitchen sink conversation that you have present, but it was something that was percolating within my network, and that resonated very strongly to me. And so I'm definitely cause driven. If I'm given a good cause, that would be the why. Then the rest I know that I can figure out. And I'm a decent communicator. I'm a decent photographer, and I have a geeky curiosity about the science and an ability to again, to translate it into layman terms. And so I knew that there was something that I could bring to that space that would separate myself from just a guy with a camera. And I should also credit the times, because we're looking here at the late '90s, early 2000s, a time when Antarctica was still a point on a map, which most people could not necessarily locate, let alone visit. When I first started going to Antarctica, there were between 12 and 15,000 visits yearly. I think we're peaking last year at 120,000 visits yearly. So it's a factor of 1 to 10. Things have transformed, and now we've got the advent of digital cameras, which makes image capture much, much easier. I was able to be at the head of the curve on that one and gain a little momentum, thankfully, and that was really fortunate for me. You wouldn't get into this line of work if you were not a glutton for punishment. I somehow was born with a gene where, I've assimilated that pain is your friend pretty quickly. Mountaineering gives you that. I was on skis when I was 3. I was on the water, sailing and then surfing and everything else, also from the time I was 3. So the interaction with nature always comes with the fact that nature's powerful. It's going to be painful at some point. You come to live with it, and you make strange bedfellows. And I think that relationship prevails even to this day. Uh, Pain is part of the process, and you could almost say that it is the ticket to entry. If you're not willing to go there, maybe it's not the right profession. And certainly in the very, very cold, you're going to be suffering. That's the deal. And the deal is, how can you make abstraction as much as possible, because of course you can't eliminate it, but in order to still be able to operate at a high level of proficiency and quality. And practice makes perfect. I mean, it's not perfect the first time. It's never perfect any time, and you will definitely make big mistakes. Injuring yourself, damaging equipment, forgetting critical pieces of equipment. All of it. I've done it. And I'm a geek, so for me, preparation is lists, double checking, triple checking, testing equipment, fun for me anyhow, double checking before departure, all of that stuff. So, but again, relatively boring. I've done 30% of my trips as a team of two, never more, and 70% traveling alone. Both have specific characteristics and needs. Very challenging missions with high risk. Better to do them with a partner. Heavy crevassed environment, presence of polar bears, although I've done a lot of those alone, candidly. But I fell through the ice on my way to the North Pole in minus 35-degree weather and clean to my neck in the seawater when the ice fell below me. I probably wouldn't be here if I didn't have a partner who helped me out. I fell through crevasses. Also nice to have a partner help you out. Yeah, these things are, the currency of the trade. But candidly, if you're really out there to photograph, you're better off alone, because it's tedious for a partner to sort of wait for you around. There's protocols of engagement, battery management, storage of camera and equipment to preserve the lenses and the quality of the gear. So all of these things is part and parcel of the work that you do there. Not so fun when somebody is freezing next to you going, "Are you done? Are you done?" I sometimes have a base and I'll just do day journeys. Mind you, the days can be 22, 24, 26 hours sometimes, but you carry a tent and a light pack, and I have a sledge, and I just pull the sledge, and I've got my camera gear and my tent and my food and my gun if I'm in the Arctic. And then, obviously you sleep with one eye open when you're in bear territory, because typically I would set up a perimeter, which would be an alarm for a bear presence, but generally it's quite cumbersome. It's kind of boring to do, and I generally skip on it, to be honest. It's less weight, and I just sleep with a big knife on my chest and the weapon nearby and hope for the best. And for me, I've been tracked by polar bears and charged and having to deal with management of an apex aggressor, and trying to make sure that we both walk away unscathed, which is the ideal outcome. But sometimes it makes you make choices that may roll the dice perhaps a little too close. But there's no more exciting experience but to find your life on the line and to come out to tell the tale. I mean, I think that's the drug. Greenland was really a happy discovery in 2010. I was, a pretty mature, older traveler by then, but I decided to do a crossing of Greenland from south to north, which in reality was a warm-up trip for a much longer trip across Antarctica. And so Greenland was 2,300 kilometers. And then I did the following year over 4,000 kilometers across Antarctica, opening a new route in that environment. And Greenland was basically designed initially just as a warm-up trip, because it's not quite as harsh as Antarctica in terms of climate. And and it was kite skiing. So it took me from the very southern tip of Greenland all the way to the northern end in a community called Karnak, which is a community of Inuits. They're actually called Inuktits, living in that region for thousands of years. And that trip was absolutely an epiphany for me. Arriving in this village of Karnak, which was at the end of a 36-hour travel day, very tiresome, coming down from the ice sheet to the sea level, carrying back and forth our gear, so portaging it back and forth, and pretty exhausted by the time we were helicoptered to the little village of Karnak. We arrived in this little town where we had a bed and a pillow and running water, and my partner beeline for the bed. And I looked at the fjord ahead of me, and there was something that beckoned me out. I was going to be there for 5 days, but I put my expedition pack down, grabbed my camera pack, and proceeded to spend 8 hours traveling on the sea ice with what turned out to be the most powerful spiritual exchange with the ice that I've ever had, which helped define my approach to how to shoot it, my understanding of the ice cycles as they relate to photography, and that really defined me as a voice for this type of environment in which I hadn't quite yet been defined just yet. And what's relevant about that story is that after 8 hours, I felt like I had really hit pay dirt, and this was like the Alibaba's cave, and I had unbelievable images, which to this day remain some of my very favorite. And I thought, I've got another 5 days of this. This is going to be a bonanza. The next day was the shooting conditions were appalling. The next day was completely fogged in. The next day the same. You get the idea. By the time the plane picked us up, the only shooting opportunity I had were those 8 hours, which I tagged on to a 36 or 38-hour day preceding it. Brought me back completely exhausted, but with amazing work. And that is my carpe diem story. You seize the moment when it presents itself, because it may never, and in this case, never presented itself again. And 8 trips later, having gone back to the same location, looking for the same conditions again and again, I only got glimpses of what that 8-hour period delivered to me. And so my big lesson to myself and to all those who care to listen is that whether it's in love, in business, in any type of venture, don't think that because it's there in front of you that it's going to be there tomorrow. You better grab it 2 full hands and take a big bite out of it. The Inuktits are a tribe of about 800 people distributed over 4 villages in the very northern part of Greenland. And so when I landed in this little village of Karnak, Karnak, if you will, is the capital. It's the hub. It's got 670 people, and that's the place that I've gone back time and again. I've visited many other places in Greenland, but I've developed an affinity specifically to that, probably because I was seeking to duplicate that experience I've just shared with you, which never really came to me again in that way. But in the process, I've gotten to be closer to some of its indigenous population and tried to develop a rapport. Not always the easiest. This is a rough culture of hunters who live in a very antagonistic environment and have an inherent symbiotic relationship with their land, but also facing incredible transformations, which are all these externalities of climate, of Western influence, of technology, of communications. All of these conspire to dilute their tradition and culture, and especially expose the rift that exists between, a symbiotic and indigenous culture with the white man who's got a history of colonialism, replete with indoctrination, relocation programs, abuse, and all the rest of it. So to try and manage all of those dynamics is not easy, because when you look like me, arriving in a place like this, you'll always be a symbol of a past that has not always been the best. So, but I try my best to, do what I can to improve the community. I work with SAIS as a big sponsor for many years, which I'm so grateful for, and they were generous enough to come with me on an adventure of delivering microscopes to the northernmost school in the world, the public school, which is in Kanak, and we delivered 8 super high-end microscopes to the little school of Kanak to try and promote the search of knowledge and the understanding of your surroundings into a culture that's transforming, that's being open to the West, and for whom it is going to be imperative to find a compromise of management between their tradition, which is under great stress because of climate and overfishing and all of these external factors, and the fact that they have an inherent knowledge, that is grounded in history and tradition, and very deep in their DNA. So that's been a lot of my work there. And in the process, I've opened my own interest in studies into multidisciplinary studies of the culture, a feat of engineering, where they have refined the tools given what was accessible to them, which was quite limited initially. It's the fan is opening today, but generally speaking, the robes were made from innings of the animals they killed. The sledges were made from driftwood or whale bones and such. And so they found what they could, and they lived according to what was provided to them by the land. And their bodies followed suit. Their fingers shortened because cold is not great for extremities. Their bodies got stockier, strong, but shorter. They've come to really understand nature in the way that it serves their purposes. They can read climate better than a barometer. They can predict where the biomass is moving over and under the surface. They have an innate sense of direction. Even in fog, they can sort of direct themselves by reading the ice and the wind and these different, physical manifestations of nature. So all of these things have made them, symbiotically connected to the environment that they live in spite of the fact that it is very antagonistic. So their diet reflects what is brought to them. Of course, that's changing now because we're bringing, Western food into their shops, and that means, polyunsaturated fats and chips and crackers and fast food and soda pops and things of that nature. So they're growing, basically diabetes and all kinds of other collateral physical conditions that reflects this input of Western commerce into their societies. And that is why that tradition is in transition. We're definitely looking at this is what's reflected in the title of this exhibit, The Last Generation on Ice. Now, of course, it's a hyperbole. I'm not suggesting that there is just one last generation, but it's tapering off. The dog teams are less in numbers. The reduction in dog sled dogs, so that is. Younger generations are more and more interested in TikTok and Instagram because they have access to this up there than they are in the hunt, which is difficult and demands a lot of discipline and commitment. And next to that comes this depression of depending on a social media that opens a visual world to which you'll never have access. And so seeing Lamborghinis in Miami Beach with palm trees and bikinis will never be in the reach of most Inuits in the northern part of Greenland. And that has a collateral impact on mental health that leads to substance abuse, alcoholism, and even suicide amongst the youth. So all these are some of the darker sides of how this is transitioning, and all the more reasons why reinforcing tradition, celebrating history and culture are important in order to bring that pride and sustain that pride within that community. If you're in a family of hunters, and from the moment you're a toddler, you're wrapped in deerskin, reindeer skin, or polar bear, whatever, and taken by the dogs, and you hear the way that the hunter speaks to the dog, and how the hunt is executed, and how weather changes, all this becomes really innate. And it would certainly, I think, be disingenuous for me to think that, in spite of the cumulative maybe 5 years that I've spent, in the polar regions, that somehow or another I would have the same level or being inspired. I have a GPS unit, I have a compass, I have Gore-Tex clothing, I've got high-powered rifles, I've got a satellite phone, and I'm making full use of the technology that is being given to me at the latitudes that I operate in. And when I'm in the company of hunters, and if I am, privileged to be able to travel with them, I just observe, I let them do it, and my life is in their hands. Icebergs are like people. Some you'd rather talk to than photograph. Not every iceberg is charismatic enough to be photographed. And so it's not because you're in an environment where there are icebergs that you are in this sort of, uh, plenitude of subject matter. Sometimes there are dozens of kilometers that separate one interesting iceberg from another. And you may walk long distances thinking that you're approaching an interesting character, only to find out that the individual is lacking a personality. So when you do find one, it's really something that you cherish. But then the conditions need to manifest. And if you notice in my photographs, they're all taken in cloudy environments, when the weather is sucked in, when there's texture in the sky, and I generally don't photograph when it's sunny. And there's a good reason for that, is that the subtlety of the colors, and this has to do with the chemistry of color. And to make this very, very brief, we interpret the millions of colors that we see through a prism of red, green, and blue. And water, H2O, suppresses the red value. So frozen H2O, which is essentially ice, is basically a combination of blues and greens. But when it's sunny, sun has a lot of red in it. It feeds in the missing red value, and ice returns to its white color, which is not so interesting. So when it's overcast, you really get to draw the subtle colors of blues and greens out of the ice. And that's why it's always overcast in the pictures, not because it's always overcast in the Arctic, because it's not true. It's overcast maybe 30, 40% of the time. The rest of the time it's sunny. So you have to wait for the conditions to manifest. Then you have to find the iceberg. And finally, the thing that really matters to me thematically is finding myself at the transition in the seasonal cycle, when the sea ice is beginning its melt phase, but it's still within a solid as well. That enables me to walk on the sea ice and benefit from incredible reflections, reflections which create a negative image of what you see on the surface. And that negative is thematically tied to a lot of my work, which is what is and what appears to be. And it relates to the climate discussion, of course, nature being as indomitable as we like to think it to be. And in reality, of course, as we know from science, it's incredibly fragile and susceptible to transformations, as we're seeing systemically from climate change. So that reflection essentially echoes, if you will, in a metaphor, the contrast between the valiance and the power of the ice and its fragility as well. But for this to happen, you need to be at this witching moment of transition between the solid and the liquid, and be there while it happened, and it's still safe enough to walk on the sea ice and not fall through it. And through this process, the temperatures will fluctuate to where it's going to be slightly above zero, good for melting, and just slightly below zero, it starts to crystallize and the reflections go away. And traveling to an icebergs, which can be tens of kilometers, um, is often a frustrated experience that transitions you from what would seem like great shooting conditions to ones that are not so ideal after all. There are two speeds to the ice. There's either the really cold and the just plain cold. The plain cold is fairly easy to manage. You just figure out systems. Your camera is going to manage pretty well up until, let's call it, minus 15, minus 20. All this is going to be fairly straightforward. The wheels start to fall off the wagon when you are beyond those temperatures. When you're into the 30s and beyond, I've traveled and photographed in as cold as minus 60 and even beyond that. This is not windshield temperature. These are mean temperatures. And it's absolutely brutal. And equipment management becomes very critical, especially as it relates to battery power. Batteries would be drained very rapidly when you're in extreme cold. So I tend to work with reflex cameras in the very cold, not digital, not what we have today, which are, everything is digital, the eyepiece and the live view, but more the old school reflex cameras because they use um, less battery power. And as well as that, they don't rely as heavily on electronics, which I don't trust in temperatures that go beyond minus 20. So the battery itself is kept in a pouch under my armpit, which requires a certain gymnastic in order to get to. The cameras would be in the sledge. You have big mitts on. You have to remove the mitts, find your camera, open the compartment, take the battery, put it in. You can't put your eye on the eyepiece because the warmth of your eyes would fog the eyepiece given the temperature difference. So you're guesstimating what the shot looks like and have a quick look at the live view when you take it just to see that the alignment is there. You bracket yourself for focus, etc., and quickly put it back in, take the battery off, put it back in, make sure the camera is safely in a place, all the while making sure that no spin drift or none of all the frost that builds on your facial system, on your jacket, etc., gets on the lens because it gets complicated to try and clean it afterwards. All of these are part and parcel of that very cold shooting experience. Greenland finds itself all of a sudden at the center of a geostrategic and geopolitical intrigue, all based on someone's vanity project to quote unquote own that environment. Um, my experience asking the perceptions in the North, what this actually means, has been a bit of a moving target. There is no love lost between the Danish relationship over time and its errors from the past, which have been trying very hard to correct in recent years, but it's left damaging scars. And so initially, the Greenlandic people, and from my very informal poll, were 50-50 split on the topic. But the Trump administration's approach, which has been very bullish, using vernacular language that was quite offensive to the local people who are proud, who are also quite aware of the white man's colonial tendencies. This has really transformed to where I think now there are 80+% against. This could change, of course, but I think that the combination of our relationship with NATO, America's relationship with NATO, and the fact that there was a compact in the early 50s between Denmark and the US, where the US has free rein to build military bases on Greenland to specifically address the threat that this present administration is claiming to be increasing. Whether or not that's true, they certainly can address it without any taking of that environment. So for me, on a personal level, but of course, I'm neither a diplomat nor a politician, but I think it's dead on arrival, and it's a non-starter. And I think that the notion of building a certain resilience in the possibility of some aggression coming from elsewhere may be a valuable choice, but I certainly don't think that taking the continent at any level is in the making, neither today nor in the future.